The stars have always been patient teachers. They do not hurry, they do not plead, they simply exist, burning through eons, watching civilizations rise from mud and ash, watching them reach upward with trembling hands, watching them fall again into silence. In the grand arithmetic of the cosmos, 1,000,000 years is barely a breath, 1,000,000,000 lives barely a whisper, and yet those whispers accumulate. They become echoes, they become warnings.
I have lived long enough to understand this now. My name is Valeth Kor Shannon, and I am the last surviving Archon of the Ascendancy, a civilization that once stretched across 17,000 star systems, that built ring worlds around dying suns and wove consciousness itself into the fabric of hyperspace. For 11,000 years we believed ourselves eternal. We believed ourselves chosen. We believed that the universe had been shaped for our dominion, and that all other species existed merely as footnotes to our magnificent story.
We were wrong. But this is not a story about our fall. Not truly. This is a story about what we found when we fell, about the hands that caught us, and about the terrible, beautiful truth we learned too late about a species we had dismissed as primitives, as children playing with fire in their tiny corner of an insignificant galaxy.
This is a story about humanity, and I am telling it because someone must, because the universe needs to understand what sleeps in that unremarkable yellow star system, what waits, what watches.
What we awakened. The devouring came without warning.
I remember the first reports, scattered, confused, easily dismissed as sensor malfunctions or the paranoid ramblings of frontier commanders. Ships vanishing, colonies falling silent, entire systems going dark, their stars still burning, but their worlds suddenly, inexplicably dead.
We sent investigation fleets. They disappeared.
We sent battle groups. They lasted longer, long enough to transmit fragmented images of something vast and ancient rising from the void between galaxies, something that consumed matter and energy and life itself with the casual hunger of a child eating sweets.
The Ascendancy had never known true war. Oh, we had crushed rebellions and absorbed lesser civilizations. We had demonstrated our supremacy countless times across millennia. But we had never faced an enemy that could not be reasoned with, could not be bought, could not be intimidated by the sheer weight of our history and power. The devouring did not negotiate. It did not threaten, it simply arrived, and where it arrived, nothing remained.
Within 300 cycles, we lost the outer provinces. Within 500, the core systems were under siege. The great shipyards of Velkarn burned. The memory libraries of ascended thought, containing 11,000 years of accumulated wisdom, were consumed in a single afternoon. Billions died screaming into the void, their final transmissions cut short as the darkness swallowed them whole.
I watched the throne world fall from the observation deck of our last remaining command carrier. I watched as the world where I had been born, where my ancestors had ruled for 300 generations, crumbled into ash and silence. I felt the psychic scream of 2 billion souls as they were devoured, and I felt something inside me break that has never healed. We ran.
17 ships. That was all that remained of the Ascendancy's once invincible armada.
17 ships carrying the last 40,000 members of a species that had once numbered in the trillions. We ran because there was nothing else to do, because the devouring was everywhere behind us and there was nowhere left to hide. Except one place.
The charts called it Sol, a minor yellow star in an unremarkable arm of an average spiral galaxy, home to a species we had observed briefly 3,000 years ago and dismissed with contempt. They had been fighting each other with sharpened metal at the time. They had not even achieved basic atmospheric flight. Our assessment had been unanimous. Primitive, violent, irrelevant, not worth the resources required for proper study or integration.
We had noted their system's coordinates and moved on, certain that they would destroy themselves long before they became worth our attention.
But now, 3,000 years later, we had nowhere else to go. The devouring was consuming everything behind us. Every ally we had ever had was dead or dying. Every sanctuary we had built was burning. And Sol was the only system in our trajectory that showed signs of technological civilization, faint radio emissions, primitive but persistent, suggesting that against all odds, the humans had survived their own violent nature.
Perhaps they had developed enough to offer shelter. Perhaps they had resources we could use. Perhaps they were advanced enough to be useful, but primitive enough to be controllable.
We approached Earth arrogantly, even in our desperation. We approached as conquerors seeking tribute, as gods deigning to notice insects. We approached expecting to find savages who would fall to their knees at the sight of our ships.
We were such fools.
The human station hung in the darkness like a half-finished thought.
It was not beautiful. It was not graceful. Where ascendancy architecture flowed in perfect mathematical curves expressing the harmony of the universe in every line, this structure was functional, blocky, practical. Its hull was scarred and patched, showing evidence of repairs and modifications accumulated over decades. It looked less like a station and more like something that had been built, broken, rebuilt, and refused to die. I watched it grow larger through the observation port of our carrier, and I felt something I had not felt since my youth: uncertainty.
"They're hailing us," Commander Thexalon said, his voice carefully neutral. He had been a fleet admiral once, commanding thousands of ships across 100 systems. Now he commanded 17 battered refugees, and the weight of that loss showed in every line of his ancient face. Standard electromagnetic transmission, primitive encoding.
They can see us. Apparently, they're requesting identification and purpose. Their tone is... He paused, searching for the right word. Polite.
Polite. Not frightened, not awed, not aggressive. Simply polite.
"Put them through," I said. The holographic display flickered to life, and I found myself looking at a human for the first time. She was smaller than I had expected, shorter than an ascendancy child, with soft brown skin and dark hair pulled back from her face. Her uniform was plain gray, marked with symbols I did not recognize. Her expression was calm, attentive, revealing nothing.
"Unknown vessels, this is Commander Sarah Chen of Unity Station 7. You've entered protected space. Please state your species of origin, your purpose, and any immediate needs you may have." Her voice was even, controlled. There was no tremor of fear, no trace of the awe that lesser species had always shown when confronted with ascendancy technology. She spoke as if 17 ships appearing from nowhere was simply another item on her daily schedule.
I felt Thexalon stiffen beside me. He had expected something different. We all had.
"I am Archon Veleth Kor Shannon of the Ascendancy," I said, allowing a measure of my authority to color my voice. We seek temporary sanctuary in your system while our fleet undergoes repairs. We have traveled far and faced difficulties.
A pause. The human's dark eyes studied something beyond the camera's view. Our ships, perhaps, or data scrolling across hidden screens.
Ascendancy, she repeated slowly. We don't have you in our diplomatic registry. You're not part of the Galactic Compact?
The Galactic Compact no longer exists, Thorlan said, and I heard the grief he could not quite hide. Nothing exists. Not anymore.
Another pause, longer this time. Then the human spoke, and her voice had changed, softened somehow, though her expression remained the same.
Your ships are damaged. I'm reading casualties, trauma signatures. She leaned forward slightly. Are you being pursued? I hesitated. To admit weakness before a lesser species went against every instinct I possessed. But what choice did we have? Yes, I said, by something that cannot be stopped, something that has destroyed everything we have ever built. We are all that remains of our civilization, Commander. 40,000 souls where once there were trillions.
I expected disbelief. I expected fear. I expected her to order us away, to protect her people from whatever horror pursued us.
Instead, she simply nodded.
Transmitting docking coordinates now. Our medical teams will be standing by. Do you have specific atmospheric or dietary requirements we should prepare for?
I stared at her. You would allow us sanctuary? Without negotiation? Without demanding tribute or concession? For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, but something in the same family. Something ancient and sad and knowing.
Archon, where we come from, when someone shows up at your door bloody and broken, you don't ask them to sign a contract. You patch them up first and ask questions later. She paused. Besides, we know what it's like to almost lose everything. We haven't forgotten.
The transmission ended. The docking coordinates appeared on our navigation systems, and I stood in silence, trying to understand what had just happened. That was unexpected, Fix-Allen said quietly.
Yes, I agreed, but I could not shake the feeling that I had missed something important. Something in her eyes when she mentioned losing everything. Something that suggested depths I could not yet fathom. We proceeded to dock, and for the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope.
I should have felt warning instead. The humans treated our wounded with gentle efficiency. I walked through the medical bays they had prepared, converted cargo holds mostly, equipped with technology that seemed crude by our standards, but was surprisingly effective. Human doctors and nurses moved among our people without hesitation, without fear, without the contempt I would have expected from beings confronted with alien physiology. They asked questions, endless questions, not about our defenses or our technology, but about our biology, our nutrition, our comfort. What temperature did we prefer? Did we require specific lighting spectrums? Were there substances in human food that might be toxic to us? One of them, a young male with hair the color of fire and more freckles than I could count, spent 3 hours learning to pronounce the names of our most critically injured so he could address them properly. When Elder Shanveth died despite their efforts, he sat with her body and wept.
I did not understand these people.
You seem troubled, Archon. I turned to find Commander Chan approaching through the crowded medical bay.
She had changed from her formal uniform into simpler clothes, practical, unadorned, stained with what I now recognized as medical fluids from helping our wounded.
"I am adjusting," I said carefully. "Your hospitality is unexpected. We came prepared to negotiate from strength. We did not anticipate."
Compassion?
The word hung between us. I recognized it from our ancient linguistic databases, a concept we had cataloged as evidence of human weakness, their tendency toward irrational emotional response. Yes, I admitted, we had believed that advanced civilizations outgrew such inefficient responses, that logic and self-interest would inevitably prevail over sentiment. Commander Chen was quiet for a moment. Around us, humans continued their work, stabilizing ascendancy survivors, speaking softly to those who could understand, simply holding the hands of those who could not.
Can I ask you something, Archon?
You may. Your records mentioned you observed humanity about 3,000 years ago. What did you see?
I considered how to answer. You were primitive, violent. Your species was engaged in constant warfare. Your technology was negligible. You had not yet developed the capacity for basic space travel.
And what did your observers conclude? That you would destroy yourselves, that your violent nature made extinction inevitable within a few centuries. She nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. And yet here we are. Yes, here you are. I studied her face, searching for some clue to the riddle she represented. How? What changed? Nothing changed, Archon. We've always been this. Violent, yes. Territorial, aggressive, prone to hatred and tribalism, and every dark impulse your observers catalogued. She paused, and something flickered in her eyes, something old and heavy. But we've also always been this. Compassionate, stubborn, determined to survive, and willing to reach out to others even when it might be safer to turn away.
These traits are contradictory.
No, they're complementary. We fight because we love. We destroy because we want to protect. We've done terrible things to each other, things that would probably horrify you if you knew the details. But we've also pulled each other back from the brink, again and again, because giving up on each other was never an option we could accept. I wanted to argue. I wanted to point out the logical inconsistency, the evolutionary impossibility of a species that was simultaneously predator and protector, destroyer and healer. But the evidence was all around me. Humans who had no reason to care whether we lived or died, working themselves to exhaustion to save lives that meant nothing to them. Your observers made a mistake, Commander Chen said quietly. They saw the violence and assumed it was our defining trait. They didn't see what the violence was for. They didn't understand that we fight hardest for the things we love. And we love. She shook her head. We love too easily, too completely. It's probably our greatest weakness.
Or your greatest strength, I heard myself say.
She looked at me then, really looked. And I felt seen in a way I had not experienced since the throne world fell. Maybe both, she said. Come on, there are some people who want to meet you, people who need to understand exactly what destroyed your civilization, and whether it's coming here next. I followed her, and with each step, the certainty that had defined my existence for 3 centuries crumbled a little more. They called it the Council of Nations, though it seemed to represent far more than merely nations. I sat in a vast circular chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that connected to similar chambers across the planet below and throughout their solar system.
Faces watched me from 100 different angles, young and old, every shade of skin, speaking dozens of different languages that were somehow translated into a single coherent stream. They were not afraid of me. That was what struck me most. They listened with grave attention as I described the devouring, as I recounted the fall of the ascendancy, as I explained that an entity capable of consuming entire star systems was now aware of this region of space and would inevitably turn its attention here. But they were not afraid. "How long until it arrives?" asked an elderly man, with skin the color of copper and eyes that seemed to have witnessed everything. "Unknown. Perhaps decades, perhaps centuries. Time has no meaning to the devouring. It does not hurry, because nothing has ever resisted it for long."
And nothing in your technology could slow it down?
We were the most advanced civilization in known space. We fought with weapons that could crack planets, with ships that could outrun light itself. We deployed every resource accumulated over 11,000 years of expansion, and we accomplished nothing except to briefly entertain it. She leaned forward. "Archon, do you know how many extinction-level events humanity has survived in the past 3,000 years? Just since your observers dismissed us as primitive savages."
I did not.
7. 7 times we came within a hair's breadth of annihilating ourselves. Nuclear war, environmental collapse, pandemic, artificial intelligence crisis, resource conflicts that brought the entire planet to the edge of total destruction. 7 times we looked into the abyss, and 7 times somehow we found a way to pull back. Another voice, younger, darker. "We've been fighting for survival since before we had words for it. Every generation, every century, every technological leap. We've had to earn them in blood. We're not an old species, Archon. We're not wise or patient or sophisticated. But we're still here, when by all rights we should have died 100 times over." "What is your point?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. The elderly man with copper skin spoke again, and his voice was gentle but implacable. "Our point, Archon, is that we've been preparing for something like this our entire existence. Not consciously, not deliberately, but we've been sharpened by conflict for so long that we don't know any other way to live. When you've survived 7 apocalypses, an 8th doesn't seem impossible, just difficult." I stared at them, these fragile-looking beings in their patched stations and practical clothes, and for the first time I began to feel something other than condescension or confusion. I began to feel afraid. Not of them, not exactly, but of what they represented. A kind of survival I had never considered possible. A tenacity that bordered on insanity. A species that had been hammered by the universe since its birth, and had responded by becoming harder than the hammer. "What will you do?" I asked, "when the devouring comes?" The faces on the displays turned to one another. Something passed between them, not spoken, perhaps not even conscious, an understanding that ran deeper than words. "We're going to fight," Commander Chen said simply. "Not because we think we can win, not because we have some secret weapon or brilliant strategy, but because fighting is what we do. It's what we've always done. And if we're going to die, we're going to die on our feet, making the bastard work for every inch." The silver-haired woman nodded. "We'll study what you can teach us about the devouring. We'll prepare. We'll build. We'll reach out to every species we can find and offer them the same choice: stand with us or stand aside.
And when the moment comes, we'll throw everything we have at the problem and see what breaks first, us or it."
"You could run," I said. "Your ships, primitive as they are, could carry at least some of your population to safety. There are regions of space the devouring has not yet reached. You could—"
"No." The word came from a dozen mouths simultaneously, with a certainty that bordered on religious conviction. "This is our home," the elderly man said, "the only home we've ever known. Every grave, every monument, every piece of art and music and memory our species has ever created, it's all here, in this system, on that blue world spinning below us." His eyes grew bright, but his voice remained steady. "We've survived worse odds, Archon. Maybe not this bad, but close enough. And we've never, ever surrendered what was ours without a fight." I thought of the throne world. I thought of how quickly we had fled, how easily we had abandoned our history and our dead. I thought of the 17 ships that represented everything left of 11,000 years of glorious civilization. And I felt ashamed.
"You are either very brave or very foolish," I said.
Commander Chen smiled, the first real smile I had seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look simultaneously younger and infinitely older. "Probably both," she said. "But those have always been our best qualities. Now," she stood, and something in her posture shifted. No longer a diplomat, no longer a caretaker, something harder. Something that had been hiding behind the compassion all along. "We have work to do, and so do you, if you're willing."
"What do you mean?"
"You've seen the devouring up close. You've studied it. You know more about its patterns and behaviors than any other living being. That knowledge could be the difference between survival and extinction. Are you willing to share it? To fight alongside us, even though you have no reason to? Even though we're just primitive savages who should have destroyed ourselves millennia ago?" The question hung in the air. Around me, 100 faces waited. Refugees from a dead civilization, watching an ancient being decide whether to join a species of children in their doomed last stand. I should have refused. I should have taken what repairs we could and fled, searching for somewhere, anywhere that might offer real safety. But safety was an illusion. The devouring would reach everywhere eventually. And these humans, these strange and contradictory and impossible humans, were offering something I had not realized I craved until that moment. Hope. Not the hope of victory, the hope of meaning, the chance to die for something rather than simply to die. "Yes," I said, "I am willing." And so began the longest, strangest, and most terrifying years of my existence. The humans worked with a fury I had never witnessed. It was not the graceful, methodical progress of the ascendancy. There was no central plan, no grand design handed down from above. Instead, there was chaos. Beautiful, productive, terrifying chaos. 1 billion different minds attacking the problem from 1 billion different angles, sharing information, arguing, collaborating, competing, failing and failing and failing again until suddenly something worked. I had expected their primitive technology to limit them. I had expected to spend decades teaching them basic principles before they could even begin to approach the level necessary to threaten the devouring. I was wrong. Within months, human scientists had dissected and improved upon propulsion systems we had refined for thousands of years. Within a year, they had developed weapons concepts we had never considered, not because they were more intelligent than us, but because they were more desperate, more creative,
more willing to try insane approaches just to see what would happen. You have to understand, one of their lead researchers explained to me, a woman named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who spoke too fast and slept too little and looked at the universe as if it owed her answers. We've never had the luxury of assuming we'd figured everything out. Every time we thought we understood physics, something came along and proved us wrong. Every time we thought we'd mastered our environment, it tried to kill us. So we learned to question everything, to test everything. To never, ever stop looking for the angle we missed. But how do you coordinate? How do you direct so many individual efforts toward a common goal? She laughed, a strange sound, half amusement and half exhaustion. We don't, not really. We just trust each other enough to share our failures and compete hard enough to push each other past our limits. It's messy. It's inefficient. It's probably a miracle we've accomplished anything at all, but it works. Somehow, it works. I watched them build. I watched them fail. I watched them get up again. I watched them argue with each other in terms that would have led to duels in the ascendancy, then shake hands and get back to work. I watched them grieve their dead and celebrate their victories and somehow never lose the fire that drove them forward. And slowly, impossibly, I began to believe that they might actually have a chance. Not a good chance, not a reasonable chance, but a chance. The first warning came 3 years after our arrival. Long-range sensors detected anomalies at the edge of human-monitored space, energy signatures that matched nothing in any database except ours. The devouring was closer than we had expected, drawn perhaps by the very activity meant to prepare for its arrival. I expected panic. I expected recrimination. I expected the humans to finally succumb to the despair that had swallowed my own people. Instead, I witnessed something I still struggled to describe. Within hours, the word had spread across Earth and throughout the solar system. Emergency broadcasts interrupted normal programming. Leaders appeared on screens to deliver statements that were calm and direct and somehow completely devoid of false reassurance. They did not pretend the danger was less than it was. They did not promise victory. They simply told their people the truth and asked them to choose. And humanity chose. I watched the volunteers pour in. Not soldiers, though they came too, but ordinary people. Engineers and teachers and farmers and artists, offering whatever skills they possessed. Factories that had been producing consumer goods began churning out components for defense systems. Schools shifted to teaching practical skills, engineering, medicine, emergency response. Children too young to truly understand drew pictures of humanity standing against the darkness, and those pictures were displayed in command centers and research labs like sacred relics. There was no chaos, no riots, no collapse of social order, just purpose. A species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself suddenly united against a common threat, and the transformation was terrifying to witness. How? I asked Commander Chen, now Admiral Chen, as we watched mobilization reports scroll across strategic displays. How do you convince billions of individuals to sacrifice their personal interests for a collective goal? She considered the question. We don't convince them. We don't have to. This is what we are, Archon, what we've always been. For all our divisions and conflicts, when something threatens all of us, we become something else, something larger than our individual selves. It doesn't last forever. It couldn't. But for a little while, we can be one people, one species, one will. She paused. It's probably the only reason we're still here. I thought about the ascendancy in its final days, the factions and the blame and the desperate scrambling for personal survival. the ships that had been lost because their commanders refused to coordinate with rivals, the knowledge that had been hoarded rather than shared because ancient families clung to their advantages even as everything burned. We could not do this, I admitted, even at the end, even when cooperation was our only hope.
You never had to, Admiral Chen said. You never faced anything that required it. Success can be as much a curse as a blessing, Archon. It can make you rigid, complacent, certain that your way is the only way because it's always worked before. She gestured at the displays, at the visualization of a species preparing for war. We've never had that luxury. We've always known that tomorrow might be the day everything changes, so we learn to adapt, to sacrifice, to trust.
Trust. Such a simple word, such an impossible concept.
And yet I saw it everywhere I looked, in the workers who built weapons they would never use, trusting that others would wield them well, in the scientists who shared breakthrough research without concern for credit, trusting that the species would remember, in the soldiers who volunteered for positions that were almost certain death, trusting that their sacrifice would matter.
These were not the primitive savages we had dismissed 3,000 years ago. These were something else entirely, something we had never seen because we had never thought to look. Something that frightened me more than the devouring itself. The years passed. The preparations accelerated. Human ships, crude by ascendancy standards but increasingly sophisticated, began patrolling the approaches to the solar system. Defense platforms rose around Earth and Mars and the gas giant moons, bristling with weapons that combined our knowledge with human innovation in ways I had never imagined possible.
And the devouring came closer.
We received sporadic transmissions from other species fleeing the advancing darkness. Some we were able to rescue, adding their knowledge and resources to the collective effort. Others vanished before we could reach them, their final screaming broadcasts cut short as the devouring consumed another pocket of life. The humans welcomed all of them, without exception, without negotiation. They shared their resources and their technology and their desperate hope with beings they had never met, simply because turning them away was not in their nature. You understand, I told Admiral Chen during one of our planning sessions, that every species you save is a species that might betray you, that might steal your technology and flee, that might sell your secrets to the devouring itself in exchange for a few more moments of existence. She did not seem surprised by the observation. Yes, some of them probably will. Some of them already have, if our intelligence is right, but most of them won't. Most of them will stand with us because we gave them a reason to, because we showed them that cooperation is possible, even between strangers, even in the face of annihilation.
And the ones who betray you?
We deal with them when we have to, but we don't let fear of betrayal stop us from reaching out. The moment we start assuming the worst about everyone, we've already lost. We've become the thing we're fighting against.
I wanted to argue. I wanted to point out all the ways this philosophy could fail, all the historical examples of trust rewarded with treachery. But I had watched humanity for years now. I had seen the statistics, the models. Their approach worked. Not perfectly, not always, but more often than not, trust bred trust. Generosity inspired loyalty, and the coalition they were building, species by species, refugee by refugee, was becoming something far stronger than the sum of its parts. I had been wrong about so many things. This was perhaps the most profound. The day came. I remember it with perfect clarity. The way the light fell through the observation windows, the hum of the station around me, the taste of recycled air that had become as familiar as home. I remember Admiral Chen standing beside me, her gray hair now fully white, her face lined with decades of preparation and worry. I remember the others who had gathered in the command center, representatives of 17 different species, united by necessity and something that had grown beyond necessity. I remember the moment the alarms began to sound. "Contact," the tactical officer reported, his voice admirably steady. "Multiple emergent signatures. Distance, outer system perimeter. Profile matches. Profile matches. Devouring combat forms." The displays shifted, showing us what we had spent years preparing to face. And despite everything, despite all the preparations and simulations and confident speeches, I felt my hearts freeze in my chest. The Devouring was not an armada. It was not a fleet. It was a wave, a living wave of darkness that consumed the stars as it moved, growing larger with every moment, every particle of matter it absorbed becoming fuel for further expansion. At its heart, barely visible through the chaos, something moved, something aware, something that had been destroying civilizations since before the Ascendancy's ancestors had learned to use tools. This was what we were facing. This was what we had chosen to fight. The command center was silent. I could feel the fear radiating from every being present, the ancient terror of the prey animal confronted by the ultimate predator. This was the moment when my own people had broken. This was the moment when the accumulated weight of cosmic insignificance had crushed our will to resist. Then Admiral Chen spoke. Someone laughed. It was nervous, inappropriate, utterly human, and somehow it broke the spell. They had been building. All these years they had been building, quietly, methodically, preparing for this exact moment. And the ships were only the beginning. I watched as defense platforms came online across the solar system, not dozens, but thousands. Weapons that combined our knowledge of the Devouring's weaknesses with human engineering principles I still did not fully understand. Networks of satellites and stations that created overlapping fields of fire, defense in depth on a scale I had never imagined possible. "How?" I whispered. "How did you build all this without us knowing?" Admiral Chen glanced at me, and there was something in her eyes I had never seen before. Not triumph, not pride, something colder, something that had been waiting a very long time. "We learned from you, Archon, from your people's mistakes. You showed us your weapons, your technology, your tactical doctrines. And then you showed us how to fail, how to fragment, how to hold back, how to let pride and old rivalries doom everything you'd built." She turned back to the displays. "We took your lessons. We just chose different ones." The Devouring was approaching now, and the first human ships were moving to intercept. I expected chaos. I expected the same fragmented, uncoordinated responses I had witnessed in the Ascendancy's final battles. Instead, I saw something else entirely. The human fleet moved as one organism. Not the rigid lockstep of the Ascendancy's military, but something more fluid, more adaptive. Wings of ships flowed around Devouring tendrils, striking and withdrawing. Heavier vessels drew attention, while smaller craft slipped through to target critical nodes. The whole formation shifted and reorganized in real time, responding to the enemy's movements with a speed and precision that should have been impossible. They were losing ships. Of course they were. The Devouring was as terrible as I remembered, consuming everything it touched, growing stronger with every vessel it absorbed. But for every ship that fell, 5 more arrived. For every tendril that broke through, 3 were driven back. And the humans kept coming.
All platforms, this is Admiral Chen. Fire pattern Omega, hold nothing back.
The defense platforms spoke. I had seen the Ascendancy's greatest weapons in action. I had witnessed the destruction of worlds and the cracking of moons. I thought I understood power.
I was wrong.
The weapons the humans had built were not more powerful than ours, not in raw output, not in basic physics, but they were designed differently. They were designed to hurt the devouring specifically, targeting the weaknesses we had identified together, exploiting patterns we had never thought to exploit because we had never been willing to sacrifice enough to try.
The devouring screamed.
It was not a sound, not exactly. It was a vibration in the fabric of space itself, a psychic shriek that resonated through every conscious mind in the system. Agony and rage, and something that might have been shock, as if the ancient entity could not quite believe what was happening to it.
For the first time in recorded history, the devouring was retreating. But the humans did not let it go.
All wings, pursuit formation. Don't let up. Don't give it time to regenerate.
The fleet surged forward, pushing beyond the solar system's edge, driving the devouring back into the darkness it had emerged from. Ships that had been held in reserve revealed themselves. More than I had realized, far more than should have been possible, a seemingly endless tide of human determination given physical form. I watched. I could do nothing else. The scale of what I was witnessing was beyond anything my experience had prepared me for. Hours passed. The devouring fragmented, reformed, tried to flank, tried to overwhelm with numbers, and every time the humans adapted. Every time they found a way. They lost ships, they lost lives. I saw memorial alerts scrolling across secondary displays, names and faces appearing and disappearing, each one a world of hopes and fears and loves extinguished. But they did not stop. And finally, as the battle stretched into its third day, I saw something I had never expected to see. The core of the devouring, the ancient, aware intelligence at its center, was dying. The humans had reached it, had surrounded it, were pouring fire into it from every direction, coordinating their attacks with an almost surgical precision. And the entity that had consumed civilizations for millions of years was finally, impossibly, being destroyed. Its death scream echoed across light years. I felt it in my bones, in my hearts, in the deepest recesses of my consciousness. Rage and disbelief, and beneath it all, a terrible recognition. The realization that it had finally encountered something it could not devour. And then it was over. The devouring was dead. The command center was silent. On the displays, human ships drifted among debris fields, searching for survivors, beginning the long process of recovery. The cost had been staggering. Thousands of ships, millions of lives, but they had won. A species that had barely achieved spaceflight 3,000 years ago had just destroyed an entity that had consumed empires since before the first stars formed. I turned to Admiral Chen. She was leaning against her command console, her face gray with exhaustion, tears cutting silent tracks through the accumulated grime of 3 days without sleep. "How?" I asked. It was all I could manage. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw grief and triumph and something else, something that looked almost like an apology. "We're human," she said simply. "This is what we do. We fight. We die. We refuse to give up even when everything in the universe is telling us we've already lost." She gestured at the displays, at the wreckage that marked humanity's greatest victory and greatest sacrifice. We didn't beat the devouring because we were stronger or smarter or more advanced. We beat it because we were too stubborn to accept defeat. Because every time it knocked us down, we got back up.
Because we'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees.
She straightened, drawing on reserves of strength I could not imagine. And because we weren't alone, every species that joined us, every piece of knowledge shared, every sacrifice made, it all mattered. We didn't save the galaxy by ourselves. We saved it together.
I thought of the ascendancy, of our pride, our certainty, our absolute conviction that we needed no one, owed nothing, were above the petty concerns of lesser beings.
We had been so wrong.
I am sorry, I said, for what my people thought of yours, for what we dismissed, for what we failed to see.
Admiral Chen reached out and laid a hand on my arm, a human gesture of comfort that I had come to understand, if not quite feel naturally.
Don't be sorry, she said. Be better. That's all any of us can do. Learn from our mistakes and try to be better.
That was decades ago now.
I am old, older than any ascendancy being has a right to be after what we suffered. But I have watched humanity grow in those decades, watched them reach out to the stars in ways that would have been impossible before the war, watched them extend the same compassion to a recovering galaxy that they showed to us in our moment of greatest need.
They are not perfect. They still fight among themselves, still struggle with their contradictory nature. But they have also built something new, a coalition of species bound not by conquest or fear, but by shared memory and earned trust. A civilization that learns from its mistakes rather than ignoring them.
I think often of the arrogance we carried when we first approached Earth. The certainty that we were gods among insects, that these primitive creatures had nothing to teach us, that our desperation entitled us to their obedience.
Only one message came back from that first contact. Not the message we expected, not the submission or the worship or the fear. The message was simpler than that and infinitely more profound.
You're safe now. We'll take it from here.
And they did. They took our knowledge and our refugees and our broken pride, and they turned it into something we could never have built alone. They faced the darkness that had destroyed us, and they did not flinch. They paid a terrible price, but they paid it willingly, for us and for every other species that had nowhere else to turn.
The universe now knows what sleeps in that unremarkable yellow star system, what waits, what watches. And I am glad of it. Because the next time something approaches Earth arrogantly, certain of its own superiority, convinced that humanity is too primitive or too weak or too divided to matter, it too will learn.
It too will receive only one message back.
And it too will understand, in its final moments, what we of the ascendancy finally came to accept, that the measure of a civilization is not in its age, or its power, or its accumulated glory. It is in how that civilization responds when there is no hope left, when the universe itself seems determined to grind it into dust, when every rational calculation says to give up and die quietly.
Humanity does not respond rationally. Humanity does not give up. Humanity takes every horror the cosmos can throw at it and transforms that horror into fuel for the furnace that burns at the species' core.
I have lived long enough to understand many things, but the greatest truth I have learned, the one I will carry with me into whatever comes after this long and painful existence, is simply this: never, ever approach Earth arrogantly.
Because humanity remembers everything.
And humanity never forgets how to fight.